Welcome back to the First Church in Chestnut Hill. I'm Reverend Mark. Given the shutdown of church gatherings due to the virus outbreak, we have sadly discontinued all church meetings, and that has included our Bible study. So what I'm going to try and do today is to give you a little bit of Bible review, at least in a monologue format. We're going to be looking at the book of Psalms, and we're going to start with Psalm 1. You can feel free to pause and go get a copy of that. The version you use doesn't matter. I'll be jumping around between various versions. If you don't have one handy, don't worry about it. It should be fine. I will first read from the King James Version of Psalm 1. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. Next we'll do the New Revised Standard Version. Happy are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or take the path that sinners tread, or sit in the seat of scoffers. But their delight is in the law of the Lord. On his law they meditate day and night. They are like trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in its season, and their leaves do not wither. In all they do, they prosper. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the righteous, the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. So two different styles, the poetry of King James versus the plodding accuracy of the New Revised Standard Version. Let's compare and contrast these. Blessed and happy are both valid translations of the Hebrew word used, which is esher. Please bear in mind that my ancient Hebrew skills are rusty to the point of near disappearance, so I rely heavily upon the scholarly work of others rather than anything approaching my own translation. Esher can be used as an interjection like, oh, blessed is the one. Happiness and blessedness, those are linked in the same sense that God's blessings are a means for achieving happiness, at least in the sense of the ancient biblical world. In the same way, happiness, or we'll call it cursedness, are linked to God's displeasure. In this sense, there can be something like a mechanistic push-pull system in place in the universe. That black and white understanding would be questioned in other books of the Bible, particularly the wisdom books, like the book of Job. And that brings me to another translation. This one is by Robert Alter. He's a professor of ancient Hebrew and comparative literature at UCal Berkeley. And the wisdom books are a particular specialty of his. Let's read his translation. Happy the man who has not walked in the wicked's counsel, nor in the way of offenders has stood, nor in the session of scoffers has sat. But the Lord's teaching is his desire, and his teaching he murmurs day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by streams of water that bears its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. And in all that he does he prospers. Not so the wicked, but like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand up in judgment, nor offenders in the band of the righteous. For the Lord embraces the way of the righteous, and the way of the wicked is lost. The first portion is similar, but notice that there are differences in verse 2. In the other versions, both King James and New Revised Standard, the person delights in the law, meditating on them or meditating generally. Alter translates the words more poetically. The Lord's teaching is his desire. Delight is more in keeping with the theme of happiness, while desire is more like hunger. Compare that with meditating. It is a chaste word. It's like a monk sitting somewhere quietly in a room. But Alter uses the word murmur. It's a more evocative choice. It's one more in sync with his imagery of desire. Now, years ago, I was leading a Bible study class, and we were reading one of Robert Alter's translations of a psalm. And his version seemingly didn't include one of the lines, and we were intrigued by exactly what that meant. Was he using an older version? Was he looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls? Had he discovered some important textual variation? While we were all speculating, one of the group was more proactive. She just emailed Professor Alter. She asked what was the difference, and he responded quickly and stated that, oops, he had forgotten to include the line in his published book. He then gave to us his full translation, including the missing verse. It's worth remembering that the Bible in translation represents an effort by someone or some group to convey a certain meaning to that text. That is what a translation is, because it can't offer the exact same meaning, the exact same imagery applied in the original language. Languages are not in that same way interchangeable. Sometimes that is an effort of translation to be as accurate as possible, like the New Revised Standard. That comes at the expense of what you might call style. For other versions, it is an effort of aesthetic pleasing, like the King James Version, but it's not as exacting of a translation. These choices come at an expense. NRSV is not nearly as poetically pleasing as King James, while King James, literally King James, sought to avoid disputes over the wording by essentially having the disagreements fudged over. Alter's translation is well in keeping with the Hebrew text, but notice he chooses words that convey this theme of desire, one that someone who read ancient Hebrew would have recognized alongside the themes of delight and meditation we get in the others. So was religious observance from the time of Psalms more ecstatic? Was it less buttoned up and pious than what we might imagine now? Now, bear in mind that the Psalms would have been sung, though we have very little idea what that music would have been like, barring a few marginal notes about instruments and the sources for the various psalms. Next, there is the metaphor, actually the simile, of likening the man to a tree or trees that have been planted by streams of water. Such a tree, planted in the mostly arid regions of the Bible, would yield fruit in season, which is good, and its leaves would not wither, which is probably better. It prospers, it thrives. This notion of thriving is ambiguous as referring either to the tree or the man referenced in the psalm. We don't know. But it's a metaphor anyway. So the vagueness of language here does not undermine the specific meaning that the author is trying to convey and that the translator is trying to preserve. But the wicked will blow away like chaff, chaff being the husks or the external casings of grain that are removed before making flour. They're removed and they're cast aside because they have no purpose for the farmer, for the miller, for the baker, for the consumer like us. I would note that the chaff is meaningful to the plant. It has its purpose. But I don't want to derail that theme. I can save that one for a sermon someday. At the end of the psalm, there is the imagery of standing. And compare that to the beginning, where there are also references to someone standing in the way, meaning the path, of sinners, of the offenders. Then there are those sitting in the seats of scoffers, the seats of the scornful. Now the wicked or the ungodly, they are not going to stand up in judgment. As Professor Alter says, they will have no leg to stand on. These are not the same Hebrew verbs used for standing at the beginning and the end, but the vivid imagery of comparing those standing and sitting is linked from the description of the wicked at the beginning and then to the consequences for the wicked at the end. The wicked shall perish, that word is used in most versions, but Alter describes the way of the wicked as being lost. as leading to nowhere, as headed towards oblivion. The way of the righteous is quite different, one would expect. There are various words used in translation to describe God's reaction, and they're actually all over the place. In King James, God knows the way of the righteous. In New Revised Standard, God watches over the way of the righteous. Robert Alter uses, he embraces the way of the righteous. I also checked the Jewish Study Bible translation, which offers yet a fourth version. God cherishes the way of the righteous. Which is it? Well, it's probably all of them. The Hebrew word is yadeh and has many possible uses, including knowing and perceiving, along with idiomatic uses like knowing in the biblical sense, which is obviously not what we're intending here. That being said, Alter uses the term embrace, and that captures a sense of intimacy, one that's implied without, frankly, making it all really too weird. Well, that is enough for this week, this experiment. Next week, we will continue along with the Psalms. I'm not going to try and do all 150 of them. We will skip around to ones that offer meaningful opportunities for pondering and that are not painfully long for me to read to you and to compare as you all sit out there on the interwebs listening. See you next week.